Chapter 22 of The House on the Downs by Gladys Edson Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Cold Fear. The arrival of the coroner terminated any further questioning of Quenton Rotherdene by Sir Quenton. The extempore inquest held in the music room, where electric lamps vied with the wan light of dawn, revealed nothing new. The public inquest was set for Thursday, 3 days later, and the coroner took his departure, leaving tragedy, suspicion, and dread behind him. It was evident from the coroner's manner that he considered some tangible member of the household the guilty person, and Mark fancied that Sir Quenton held the same opinion. Fazenta Lee was the only one whose companionship the baronet welcomed. In fact, he seemed to depend upon his former ward in a way that was almost pitiful. Eve's death by violence, following so closely upon the disclosures at the inquest, had stricken him to the soul, and made him for the time being a changed and broken man, morose and distrustful toward everyone but Fazenta. His brother he would not talk with at all, and Quenton Rotherdene, resenting the baronet's attitude, spent the greater part of the ensuing day experimenting in his chemical laboratory. Mr. Elphick's well-intentioned but fussy solicitude served only to irritate Sir Quenton, and the little naturalist, hurt much as a child would have been, finally in the afternoon wandered out on the downs, dejectedly trailing his butterfly net. Mrs. Carswell, too, was grieved by Sir Quentin's refusal to taste the delicious broth she had prepared for him with her own hands. Indeed, as dusk drew on, Sir Quentin's impatience with and distrust of those about him, with the single exception of Fazenta, increased. It was as though he expected another blow to fall when night set in, and knew not whom to suspect. Rodney Sherrod, with an ugly-looking swelling on his head from Burton's rough handling, came down to tea, which was served on the south terrace. The Romany's explanation for his absence from the Grange seemed honest enough. He had quarreled with Eve, gone up on the downs to cool off, and then, when the storm which had overtaken him had cleared away, he yielded to the gypsy in his blood and lived a nomad's life for a few days. Sir Quentin kept his thoughts to himself, but his manner towards the Romany was constrained and remote, and Rodney plainly chafed under it. He had already viewed Eve's poor body, and had given way to a wild outburst of grief that had undoubtedly betrayed to Sir Quentin his passion for the dead woman. Tea was brought by Cynthia Melsom, who was staying on at the Grange because the coroner had forbidden her to leave. Sir Quentin surveyed the lady's maid with some displeasure. "Why did not Soames bring the tea?" Cynthia gave a conscious little tilt to her coquettishly becapped head, smiling in a slow and provocative way. "Soames was busy with another matter, and I was tired of sitting around doing nothing. You know there are no duties for me now, so I asked if I might bring in the tea. You don't object, sir?" "Not at all," said the baronet stiffly. Cynthia set down the tea service before Fazenta and waited to pass the cakes. Mark noticed that her eyes were studying first one member and then another of the little group upon the terrace. The woman detective, Mercedes Quero, returned Cynthia's scrutiny at some length. The lady's maid flushed angrily under the steady gaze of those clear brown eyes, and turning away, devoted herself to the duties of waitress. "No tea or cakes, Miss Lee?" she queried officiously and somewhat pertly. "You'd best have a cup of your special tea." She indicated a little individual pot of Sèvres china. "Soames made it very weak, just as you like it." "Well, a small cup perhaps, Cynthia, but no cakes." Sir Quentin looked at her solicitously. "Aren't you feeling well, Fazenta? You ate almost nothing at luncheon, and you had no breakfast." "Oh, yes, I did," she assured him. "Mrs. Carswell made some broth and brought it up to me. To please her, I took it all, but I rather had to force it down, and I haven't felt like eating much of anything since. I'm quite all right, though." "I hope so," said Sir Quentin anxiously. "Petherton shall look you over this evening." "But I don't need Dr. Petherton. I am just tired, not ill at all." "Petherton shall be the judge of that." Sir Quentin spoke decisively. "I can't have anything happen to you, Fazenta." There was a break in his voice, and the lines in his face, marked by tragedy, seemed deeper riven. Quenton Rotherdene's somber, cynical eyes studied the Romany as she listlessly sipped her tea. "It's not like you to go to pieces, Fazenta?" She straightened in her chair. "I haven't gone to pieces, Mr. Rotherdene." "No?" he queried in an odd tone. "Why don't you drink your tea, then? Too weak, is it, or not weak enough?" Sir Quentin turned upon his brother with unwonted sharpness. "Let her alone, Alwyn. This is not the time to make yourself disagreeable. We have enough to bear without that." The younger Rotherdene set his cup down hard. A suggestion of a sneer curled his lips. "I forgot Fazenda is sacrosanct." "You have forgotten many other things," rebuked the baronet sternly. "Respect for the dead, or you would not behave yourself in this objectionable manner." Alwyn's dark skin paled. He rose abruptly. "We seem to rub each other the wrong way. If you need me for anything later, you'll find me in my laboratory." Mr. Elphick came out from the Grange as the younger Rotherdene passed in. The little naturalist looked both warm and dejected. He was still trailing the butterfly net. "I hope you didn't mind my going out on the downs, Quentin," he began apologetically. "There didn't seem to be anything you would allow me to do for you." He stole a reproachful glance at his kinsman. Sir Quentin smiled faintly with something of his usual kindness. "I'm glad that you went, Cousin Theophilus. There was nothing anyone could do for me. Did you have any good luck? Catch any rare specimens?" Mr. Elphick beamed fondly at the baronet over the cup of tea Cynthia passed him. "Now, that's very nice of you. Very nice indeed to take an interest in my butterfly collecting at this sad time. But as a matter of fact, I had very poor luck today. I could capture nothing except the Lycaena icarus, the, so to speak, common blue butterfly. Now, if I could only have caught a Lycaena semi-argus or a Lycaena bella-argus. You know the salient differences of the two species, Quentin? The semi-argus, a mazarine blue, and the bella-argus, a pure Clifton blue." The baronet nodded absently. "Ah, to be sure, yes. Cynthia, pass the cakes to Mr. Elphick." Cynthia, as she obeyed, gave Mr. Elphick one of her sly little glances. "Perhaps you'd like a cup of weak tea, sir, the same as Miss Lee?" The little naturalist received the glance and the suggestion with disapproval. "I am satisfied, Melsom, eminently satisfied." Fazenda rose a little unsteadily. She turned to Sir Quentin. "I think if you will excuse me, I will lie down before dinner, unless you need me for something. I am tired." Sir Quentin jumped up and went over to her side. "You are ill, Fazenda." "Only tired," she denied, trying to smile. As a matter of fact, she looked decidedly ill. She was flushed as though with fever, her eyes were dull, the lids puffed, and there was a little pucker of pain on her forehead. Cynthia Melsom stared at Fazenda curiously. Mercedes Quero came forward and slipped her arm about the Romany's waist. The detective's face was grave. "You had better lie down, Miss Lee. Let me help you up to your room. I think, Sir Quentin, it would be advisable to call Dr. Petherton at once." "Bless and save us!" exclaimed Mr. Elphick fussily. "Fazenda, you shouldn't be worrying Sir Quentin now, and getting the house overrun with doctors again. If you would simply go to bed and stay there till morning." The futile little man's admonitions trailed away unheard, for Fazenda became suddenly faint, and the baronet, a terrible questioning fear in his eyes, carried her upstairs to her room with Mark's assistance. Fazenda's swoon was succeeded by an attack of severe pain and nausea, which further alarmed Sir Quentin. Mercedes Quero called up Dr. Petherton, while Rodney Sherrod, smarting under the baronet's refusal to allow him to assist with Fazenda, went out on the downs again to find what peace he might on the breezy heights. From the terrace to which Mark returned, he saw Detective Inspector Burton come out from the gardens and follow the gypsy violinist. "Dear, dear!" exclaimed Mr. Elphick querulously. "I wonder what trouble is coming to poor Quentin next. Inconsiderate of Fazenda, very inconsiderate, to crumple up like this." "Perhaps," suggested Mercedes Quero, who at that moment came out on the terrace, "Miss Lee has been drinking too much tea lately." Cynthia Melsom glanced up sharply from the little wicker tea-table she was clearing off. "Miss Lee drinks very weak tea. Oh, very weak indeed," observed Mr. Elphick. "I should hardly suppose it could be injurious." The detective gazed reflectively at the serving table. "Does Miss Lee always have her special pot of tea?" "Oh, always," the little naturalist answered. "No one else could possibly drink such weak tea as Fazenda insists upon having." "Oh, well, we all have our own peculiar tastes," responded Mercedes Quero indifferently. "Melsom, will you tell Sir Quentin that Dr. Petherton will be here directly?" Cynthia's eyes, meeting the detective's, held antagonism. "I've the tea service to clear away," she responded pertly. "I'll send a footman up to Sir Quentin." Mercedes Quero smiled without rancor. "You can't forgive the parlour-maid for proving to be a detective, And you don't like detectives, do you, Melsom?" Cynthia's lips tightened. Without replying, she busied herself with the teacups. Mr. Elphick picked up his butterfly net. "I am going to try and persuade Sir Quentin to lie down and rest. What with Eve's death and Fazenda worrying him so, he will be worn out. Fazenda should do very well with Mrs. Carswell, and the doctor coming soon." Mark looked after the little naturalist and smiled amusedly at Mercedes Quero. "Queer little chap, but devoted to Sir Quentin." The detective nodded indifferently. "Just a minute, Melsom," as Cynthia was about to carry away the tea service. "I think I'll take another cup of tea, but I don't want it as strong as I had it before. I'll try Miss Lee's special brew. There is some left, I see. Pour me out about half a cup." Cynthia wore an odd expression. "I think you would find Miss Lee's tea too weak. You had better have another cup of the strong and add hot water." But the detective laughingly insisted upon tasting Fazenda's. "I want just what I want, Melsom, and I always have my own way." "Very well, miss." Cynthia's voice was hard. Mercedes Quero, with a curious little smile, took the cup from Cynthia's hand. "No sugar and no milk, thank you. I will have it clear. You will send a footman up to Sir Quentin now?" As the lady's maid left the terrace, Mercedes Quero set down the cup, to which she had barely touched her lips, and drew from her silk handbag a tiny empty vial, gold-stoppered. To Mark's amazement, she filled the little flask with the tea in her cup, throwing the surplus liquid into the shrubbery at the foot of the terrace. "Mr. Brandon," she said directly, meeting his scrutiny, "I believe you are a good friend to Sir Quentin, and I am going to trust you. I want this tea analyzed by a chemist." "Analyzed? Great Scott! You don't think there's anything wrong with it?" "I am afraid I do. Fazenda Lee has not been feeling well for the past 2 or 3 days. She would not let Sir Quentin know, but I found out through Cicely Carswell, who is quite worried about the bad attacks of apparent indigestion Miss Lee has been having lately." "I know Fazenda has not been down to breakfast for 2 mornings," reflected Mark soberly, "and I have seen Mrs. Carswell carrying broth to her room, but I supposed it was simply nerve strain." "It is more serious than that, Mr. Brandon. I believe that Fazenda Lee is suffering from arsenical poisoning, given in graduated doses with criminal intent. She has all the usual symptoms: flushing, puffed eyelids, pain and nausea, and so forth." "Arsenical poisoning? But this is horrible, Miss Quero. Who would attempt such a dastardly—" "The same person who is responsible for every outrage, great or small, that has terrorized the Grange for the past 3 months. The same person, Mr. Brandon, who murdered Craddock Rayner and Lady Eve Rotherdene. Fazenda Lee, without doubt, is marked for the next victim." "Horrible!" he averred again. "You can't mean it is some member of the household?" "It must be, Mr. Brandon. Who else would have equal opportunity?" "But such a person would be a fiend." "This person is a fiend, mad with the lust to injure and to kill, but cunning enough to conceal this lust." Mark put a shaking hand to his head. "You suspect some definite person?" "I do more than suspect. I know. But I have no proof, and I can only get it by laying a trap and catching this fiend off guard. For this reason, Mr. Brandon, I desire above all else that no one in the household be allowed to know what I have confided to you. Sir Quentin, I think, suspects, but no one else must do so. If the murderer should believe that we are on the trail, these criminal activities would instantly cease, and the opportunity for proving this person's guilt would be lost." "But if what you suspect is true, Miss Lee's life is in constant danger. One more dose might prove fatal. She may even be dying now." "She is safe for the present, Mr. Brandon. I instructed Sir Quentin to give her an emetic with his own hands. That is the best antidote, and to allow no one to come near her until Dr. Petherton arrives. If he diagnoses her illness as arsenical poisoning, and a chemical analysis of this tea confirms it, adequate means will be taken to protect her." "I should say," observed Mark, "that the sooner the walls of the east wing were torn down, the better. Isn't it the night lair of this fiend?" "It is, and because of that fact, I don't want the walls torn down. It may be possible to trap the guilty person there. I have learned most of the secrets of the east wing. Ah, here is Dr. Petherton now." A dusty little motor car was just swinging in at the driveway. "I must speak with the doctor, but I want this tea analyzed as soon as possible, so that it may either confirm or refute his diagnosis. Mr. Brandon, would you be willing to take this vial at once to Vatchel's chemist shop in the village? You can tell him that you are a messenger from the police, but give him no details. Ask him to put everything else aside and analyze it immediately." Say that a police doctor suggested the surest test he knows of for arsenic, and wait for his report. Mark had a sudden inspiration. Mr. Alwyn Rotherdene is a chemist, specialized in that subject at the University of London, and he has a testing laboratory in full swing. Why couldn't he analyze the tea? It would save time, and he's up in his laboratory now. Mercedes Quero shook her head. I do not want it analyzed in this house. Mark stared at her, a new horror gaining hold upon him. I'll take it to Vachel, he agreed dully. End of chapter 22.